WWE just crossed a line they can never uncross. What happened at SmackDown wasn't just a return, it was a nuclear detonation that has completely shattered everything we thought we knew about the Bloodline, about Roman Reigns, and about WWE's willingness to play with absolute fire. And I'm telling you right now, if you think Roman's previous dominance was controversial, you haven't seen anything yet, because what went down with Zilla Fatu is going to make every wrestling fan question whether WWE has completely lost their minds. But here's the question that's going to make your blood boil: why would WWE bring in the most dangerous member of the Anoa'i family when they know it's going to create chaos that could destroy careers, and friendships, and potentially put wrestlers in the hospital? Because what Roman and Zilla did on SmackDown wasn't just shocking, it was a declaration that the Bloodline is done playing by anyone's rules. Hashtag the return that nobody saw coming but everyone should have expected. Let me start by saying something that's going to infuriate half of you watching this video. Roman Reigns' return with Zilla Fatu wasn't just planned weeks in advance, it was inevitable. WWE has been building toward this moment for months, dropping hints that only the most dedicated fans picked up on, creating a storyline that was always going to explode in the most controversial way possible. But here's what makes this return different from every other shocking WWE return in recent memory: this wasn't about nostalgia, this wasn't about bringing back a beloved character, and this definitely wasn't about giving fans what they wanted. This was about Roman Reigns making a statement that he's willing to align himself with the most dangerous, most unpredictable member of his family to reclaim his position at the top of WWE. Zilla Fatu, and let me educate those of you who don't know who this man is, isn't just another member of the legendary Anoa'i wrestling family. This is a 6 feet 2 inches, 300-pound wrecking machine who has spent years building a reputation as someone who doesn't just win matches, he ends careers. His independent wrestling career has been built on a foundation of legitimate violence, genuine intimidation, and a willingness to cross lines that other wrestlers won't even approach. When Roman Reigns decided to bring Zilla into WWE, he wasn't just adding muscle to the Bloodline, he was adding a weapon of mass destruction that has the potential to completely reshape the power structure of the entire company. Hashtag the SmackDown moment that changed everything. The way this return happened was perfect in its execution and terrifying in its implications. SmackDown was proceeding normally, with various storylines playing out in typical WWE fashion, when suddenly the lights went out. Not dimmed, not flickered, completely out, plunging the entire arena into darkness that lasted long enough to make everyone genuinely uncomfortable. When the lights came back on, Roman Reigns was standing in the center of the ring like he had materialized out of thin air. But he wasn't alone. Next to him stood a man that most of the audience didn't immediately recognize, but whose presence immediately changed the entire energy in the arena. Zilla Fatu didn't need an introduction. His physical presence, his intimidating stare, the way he carried himself, everything about him screamed danger in a way that made even the most jaded wrestling fans sit up and take notice. But here's what made this moment explosive: Roman didn't grab a microphone to explain what was happening. He didn't cut a promo about family loyalty or bloodline tradition. Instead, he simply pointed at the entrance ramp and waited. What happened next sent shockwaves through the entire wrestling world. Hashtag the systematic destruction that followed within minutes of Roman and Zilla's appearance. Wrestlers started coming to the ring. Not because they were scheduled for matches, not because they had storyline reasons to be there, but because Roman's return had created a situation that demanded responses from everyone on the roster. The first wrestler to answer Roman's silent challenge was LA Knight, who stormed to the ring with the kind of intensity that made it clear he wasn't there for a friendly conversation. Knight grabbed a microphone and immediately went on the attack. So the so-called tribal chief comes crawling back with another family member, Knight said, his voice carrying that characteristic intensity that has made him one of SmackDown's most compelling performers. Roman, you've spent years hiding behind your cousins, hiding behind your family, hiding behind anyone who would stand between you and the consequences of your actions. The crowd was electric, clearly sensing that something real was about to happen. And now you bring in another cousin? Another family member to fight your battles for you? When are you going to learn that no amount of backup is going to change the fact that your time at the top is over? Roman's response was immediate and terrifying. He didn't argue with Knight's words. He didn't defend his decision to bring Zilla to WWE. Instead, he simply nodded to Zilla. What happened next was brutal. Zilla moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size, closing the distance between himself and LA Knight in seconds. But instead of throwing a typical wrestling move, Zilla grabbed Knight by the throat and lifted him off the ground with one hand. The crowd's reaction was immediate, a mixture of excitement and genuine concern as they realized they were watching something that felt more like a legitimate assault than a wrestling segment. Knight was helpless in Zilla's grip, his feet dangling off the ground, his face showing genuine fear as he realized he was completely at the mercy of someone who clearly had no intention of showing any. Roman finally spoke, his voice carrying throughout the arena despite not using a microphone. "You want to know when I'll stop bringing family members to handle my business?" Roman asked, his tone carrying that dangerous edge that we've learned to recognize as a warning. "When people stop making my business their problem." Hashtag the message that sent shockwaves through the locker room. Zilla released LA Knight, letting him drop to the mat like a discarded toy. But the message had been sent, and it was crystal clear. The Bloodline wasn't just back, they were back with a level of violence that exceeded anything we'd seen before. But the demonstration wasn't over. As Knight was recovering on the mat, other wrestlers began appearing on the entrance ramp. Not to help Knight, but clearly to assess the threat that Roman and Zilla represented. Among them were some of SmackDown's biggest names, wrestlers who had been feuding with Roman for months, wrestlers who had been vocal about the Bloodline's dominance needing to end. Roman surveyed the collection of talent at the top of the ramp and made another gesture to Zilla. This time, Zilla didn't wait for specific instructions. He rolled out of the ring and began walking up the entrance ramp toward the assembled wrestlers. The reaction was immediate and telling. These weren't rookies or enhancement talent, these were established WWE superstars, men who had faced every type of opponent, who had been in countless high-pressure situations. But as Zilla approached, they backed away. Not because they were cowards, but because something about Zilla's presence made it clear that a confrontation with him wouldn't be a typical wrestling interaction, it would be genuinely dangerous. Hashtag the roster's response that revealed everything. What happened next exposed the true power dynamic that Roman and Zilla had created with their return. Instead of standing their ground and confronting this obvious threat to the locker room, the assembled wrestlers retreated backstage. But here's what made this controversial: several wrestlers who had been vocal critics of Roman's previous dominance were among those who backed down. Wrestlers who had spent months claiming they weren't intimidated by the Bloodline, wrestlers who had positioned themselves as the solution to Roman's tyranny, suddenly found themselves unwilling to confront the new version of the threat. This created an immediate narrative problem for WWE. How do you explain established main event talent being intimidated by someone who had never appeared on WWE television before? How do you justify wrestlers who had been built up as fearless competitors suddenly showing fear? The answer, as it became clear over the following days, was that WWE wasn't trying to explain it. They were embracing it. They were acknowledging that some threats are so legitimate, so dangerous, that even trained wrestlers recognize when they're facing something beyond typical competition. Hashtag Zilla Fatu, the family member we never expected to understand the explosive impact of Zilla's debut. You need to understand who he is beyond just being another member of the Anoa'i family. Zilla represents everything that makes the Samoan wrestling dynasty legendary, but concentrated into someone who has spent years developing a reputation for genuine violence. His independent wrestling career has been built on matches that other wrestlers refuse to take, confrontations that have ended with opponents requiring medical attention, and a willingness to engage in the kind of physical competition that blurs the line between entertainment and legitimate fighting. But here's what makes Zilla dangerous in the WWE context: he's not just physically intimidating, he's smart. His understanding of psychology, his ability to create genuine fear in opponents, his willingness to use intimidation as a weapon, all of these factors make him more than just a powerful wrestler, they make him a genuine threat to anyone who opposes him. When Roman brought Zilla into WWE, he wasn't just adding another family member to the Bloodline, he was adding someone who could change the entire dynamic of how conflicts get resolved in the company. Hashtag the backstage chaos that nobody talks about. According to multiple sources within WWE, Zilla's debut created immediate backstage chaos that went far beyond typical wrestling storyline development. Wrestlers who had been confident in their ability to handle any threat suddenly found themselves questioning whether they wanted to be involved in storylines that might put them in direct conflict with Zilla. This created a domino effect throughout the roster. Storylines that had been planned for months suddenly needed to be reconsidered because key participants were no longer comfortable with the level of physical intensity that might be required. But here's the controversial part: WWE management not only allowed this situation to develop, they encouraged it. Rather than reassuring talent that Zilla would be handled like any other performer, they allowed the uncertainty and genuine concern to influence how storylines developed. This approach created something that WWE hasn't had in years: genuine unpredictability. When wrestlers are genuinely uncertain about how conflicts might escalate, when they're genuinely concerned about their physical safety, it creates television that feels real in a way that scripted entertainment rarely achieves. Hashtag Roman's strategic masterstroke. From Roman's perspective, bringing Zilla into WWE represents the ultimate strategic move. For years, Roman has been criticized for relying on family members to maintain his position at the top of the company. Critics have argued that he's never been able to succeed on his own, that he's always needed backup to handle his opponents. By bringing in Zilla, Roman has essentially said, "You want to see what happens when I stop holding back? You want to see what the Bloodline looks like when we stop playing by your rules? Here's your answer." Zilla represents Roman's willingness to escalate conflicts beyond what other wrestlers are prepared to handle. He represents a level of intensity and genuine danger that makes opposition think twice about challenging the Bloodline. But most importantly, Zilla represents Roman's recognition that maintaining power in WWE requires constant evolution, constant adaptation, and a willingness to cross lines that competitors won't cross. Hashtag the fan reaction that split the wrestling world. The fan reaction to Roman and Zilla's debut has been explosive and deeply divided. On one side, you have fans who are thrilled to see WWE embracing genuine intensity, legitimate unpredictability, and storylines that feel more real than typical wrestling entertainment. These fans argue that Zilla's presence has immediately made WWE programming more compelling, more unpredictable, and more must-see than it's been in years. They point to the genuine reactions of other wrestlers, the obvious shift in locker room dynamics, and the sense that anything could happen as evidence that this storyline represents exactly what WWE needed. On the other side, you have fans who are genuinely concerned about the implications of bringing someone with Zilla's reputation into WWE's more controlled environment. These fans worry that the line between entertainment and legitimate violence is being blurred in ways that could result in serious injuries. But perhaps most tellingly, both sides agree that Zilla's presence has created something that WWE hasn't had in years: genuine uncertainty about outcomes, genuine investment in what happens next, and genuine concern about the safety of everyone involved. Hashtag the locker room divide that's tearing WWE apart. What's become clear in the days following Roman and Zilla's return is that their presence has created a fundamental divide within the WWE locker room that goes beyond typical wrestling storylines. On one side, you have wrestlers who view Roman and Zilla as a legitimate threat that needs to be confronted collectively. These wrestlers argue that allowing the Bloodline to operate with this level of impunity sets a dangerous precedent that could make WWE unsafe for everyone. On the other side, you have wrestlers who believe that confronting Roman and Zilla is simply too dangerous to be worth the risk. These wrestlers argue that some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when the potential consequences include genuine physical harm. But here's the controversial part: there's a third group of wrestlers who are reportedly trying to align themselves with Roman and Zilla, recognizing that being on their side might be safer than being in opposition to them. This three-way split has created backstage tension that's affecting every aspect of WWE programming. Storylines are being influenced by wrestlers' genuine concerns about their safety. Match outcomes are being affected by performers' unwillingness to engage in certain types of conflict. Even simple backstage interactions are being influenced by the question of where everyone stands regarding the Bloodline situation. Hashtag the management response that changes everything. WWE management's response to the situation has been both surprising and telling. Rather than attempting to control or limit Roman and Zilla's impact on the roster, they've essentially given them carte blanche to operate however they see fit. This hands-off approach has created a situation where Roman and Zilla are operating with fewer restrictions than virtually any other performers in the company. They're being allowed to influence storylines organically, to create genuine tension with other performers, and to blur the lines between entertainment and legitimate intimidation. But this approach also represents a massive risk for WWE. By allowing genuine tension and uncertainty to develop among their roster, they're creating situations that could spiral out of control in ways that result in serious injuries, legal problems, or public relations disasters. However, the ratings and fan engagement numbers suggest that this risk is paying off. The unpredictability and genuine tension that Roman and Zilla have created has resulted in some of the highest viewership numbers SmackDown has seen in months. Hashtag the psychological warfare that's changing wrestling. What makes Roman and Zilla's partnership particularly effective is their understanding of psychological warfare. They're not just physically intimidating their opponents, they're creating genuine psychological pressure that affects how other wrestlers approach their jobs. Zilla's presence at ringside during Roman's matches creates a level of tension that goes beyond typical wrestling psychology. Opponents find themselves constantly aware of the potential for violence that extends beyond the structured confines of a wrestling match. This psychological element has begun affecting match quality in unexpected ways. Some wrestlers are performing better because the genuine stakes have elevated their intensity. Others are performing worse because the psychological pressure is affecting their ability to focus on wrestling fundamentals. But most interestingly, the psychological warfare is creating storylines that feel more organic and less scripted than typical WWE programming. When wrestlers are genuinely concerned about their safety, their reactions feel more authentic, their motivations feel more real, and their conflicts feel more meaningful. Hashtag the evolution of modern wrestling entertainment. Roman and Zilla's impact on WWE represents something larger than just one storyline or one feud. It represents a fundamental shift in how wrestling entertainment can blur the lines between scripted content and legitimate competition. For years, wrestling fans have complained that modern WWE is too safe, too predictable, too obviously scripted. The presence of genuine uncertainty, genuine concern, and genuine unpredictability addresses these complaints in ways that traditional booking approaches never could. But this evolution also raises serious questions about the ethics and safety of creating entertainment that relies on genuine fear and legitimate intimidation. When performers are genuinely concerned about their physical safety, when storylines are influenced by real-world considerations about violence and injury, the line between entertainment and exploitation becomes increasingly blurred. Hashtag the competition's response and industry impact. The wrestling industry's response to Roman and Zilla's WWE debut has been fascinating and revealing. Competitors have been watching closely to see how audiences respond to programming that feels more legitimate and less scripted than traditional wrestling entertainment. Some promotions are reportedly considering their own approaches to creating more authentic feeling content, recognizing that audiences seem to crave the unpredictability and genuine tension that Roman and Zilla have brought to WWE. Others are taking a wait-and-see approach, concerned about the potential legal and safety implications of programming that relies on genuine intimidation and real psychological pressure. But regardless of their specific approaches, every major wrestling promotion is having internal discussions about what Roman and Zilla's success means for the future of wrestling entertainment and how far promotions should go in blurring the lines between scripted content and legitimate competition. Hashtag the unexpected alliances and betrayals. One of the most interesting developments since Roman and Zilla's debut has been the way their presence has affected existing relationships throughout the WWE roster. Wrestlers who had been allies have found themselves on opposite sides of the question of how to respond to the Bloodline threat. Some tag teams have split because one partner wanted to confront Roman and Zilla while the other preferred to avoid conflict. Some stables have fractured along similar lines, with members disagreeing about whether the potential rewards of opposing the Bloodline are worth the obvious risks. But perhaps most surprisingly, some wrestlers who had been longtime enemies have found themselves working together, recognizing that the threat posed by Roman and Zilla requires setting aside personal animosities in favor of collective action. These organic changes to roster dynamics have created storyline opportunities that feel more authentic than typical WWE booking because they're arising from genuine performer concerns rather than scripted creative decisions. Hashtag the media attention that WWE never expected. The mainstream media attention that Roman and Zilla's debut has generated has been unprecedented for a wrestling storyline. Sports journalists, entertainment reporters, and even legal analysts have been covering the story, recognizing that what's happening in WWE represents something larger than typical wrestling entertainment. Much of the coverage has focused on the ethical questions surrounding entertainment that relies on genuine intimidation and real psychological pressure. Legal experts have raised questions about WWE's responsibility for performer safety when storylines blur the lines between scripted content and legitimate threat. But the coverage has also highlighted the audience engagement and authentic emotional investment that this approach has created, suggesting that there might be broader applications for entertainment that incorporates more realistic elements of uncertainty and genuine stakes. This mainstream attention has been both beneficial and challenging for WWE. The increased visibility has brought new viewers and generated significant social media engagement, but it has also attracted scrutiny from regulatory bodies and safety organizations that typically don't pay attention to wrestling programming. Hashtag the long-term implications that nobody's discussing. Looking beyond the immediate impact of Roman and Zilla's partnership, there are long-term implications for WWE that extend far beyond current storylines. The success of this approach suggests that audiences are hungry for entertainment that feels more authentic and less obviously scripted. This could influence how WWE approaches future storylines, potentially leading to more programming that incorporates genuine uncertainty and real stakes. But it could also create pressure to constantly escalate the level of authentic tension and legitimate intimidation, potentially leading to situations that become genuinely dangerous. There's also the question of how this approach affects performer recruitment and retention. Some wrestlers might be attracted to the opportunity to work in an environment that feels more legitimate and less scripted. Others might be deterred by the genuine risks and psychological pressure that this approach creates. Hashtag the international perspective that changes everything. The international wrestling community's response to Roman and Zilla's debut has provided interesting perspective on cultural differences in entertainment preferences and safety standards. Promotions in some countries have expressed interest in similar approaches, while others have raised concerns about the safety and ethical implications. These different cultural perspectives highlight the fact that what feels appropriate and entertaining varies significantly across different audiences and regulatory environments. What works for WWE's primarily American audience might not translate effectively to other markets with different expectations and safety standards. This international dimension adds another layer of complexity to WWE's approach, as they need to consider how programming that works domestically might affect their global brand and international business relationships. Hashtag the performer development implications. Roman and Zilla's success has significant implications for how WWE approaches performer development and training. The psychological skills required to work effectively in an environment with genuine uncertainty and real stakes are different from traditional wrestling training. Future performers might need to develop stronger psychological resilience, better ability to work under genuine pressure, and more sophisticated understanding of how to create authentic tension without crossing into genuinely dangerous territory. This could lead to changes in how WWE's developmental territories operate, potentially incorporating more psychological training and authentic competition elements into their performer preparation programs. Hashtag the technology and production challenge is creating programming that feels authentic while maintaining appropriate safety standards requires sophisticated production techniques and careful technological coordination. WWE's production team has had to develop new approaches to capturing genuine moments while ensuring that situations don't escalate beyond manageable levels. This has led to innovations in how wrestling television is produced, with more real-time monitoring of performers' psychological states, more sophisticated contingency planning for unexpected developments, and more nuanced approaches to presenting authentic moments without compromising safety. These technological and production innovations could have applications beyond wrestling, potentially influencing how other forms of reality-based entertainment are created and managed. Hashtag the economic impact that surprises everyone. The financial success of programming featuring Roman and Zilla has been remarkable and has exceeded WWE's expectations in multiple areas. Viewership numbers, merchandise sales, social media engagement, and pay-per-view buy rates have all shown significant increases since their debut. This economic success validates WWE's willingness to take creative and safety risks in pursuit of more engaging content. But it also creates pressure to maintain the level of authentic tension and genuine unpredictability that audiences have come to expect. The challenge moving forward will be sustaining this level of engagement without constantly escalating the risks and intensity to unsustainable levels. Hashtag the future that nobody can predict. What makes Roman and Zilla's partnership so compelling is that nobody, not WWE management, not other wrestlers, not fans, and possibly not even Roman and Zilla themselves, knows exactly where the storyline is heading. The genuine uncertainty, the authentic psychological pressure, and the real stakes have created a situation where traditional wrestling booking approaches don't apply. Storylines are developing organically based on genuine performer reactions and real-world considerations rather than predetermined creative decisions. This unpredictability is both exciting and terrifying. It creates must-see television because audiences genuinely don't know what's going to happen next. But it also creates genuine risks because situations could develop in ways that result in serious consequences. Hashtag the legacy question that defines everything. Ultimately, the success or failure of Roman and Zilla's partnership will be determined by whether they can maintain the level of authentic engagement they've created without crossing lines that result in genuine harm to performers or damage to WWE's long-term viability. If they succeed, they could fundamentally change how wrestling entertainment is created, potentially ushering in an era of programming that feels more authentic and engaging than traditional approaches. If they fail, they could serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of blurring the lines between entertainment and legitimate threat. But regardless of the ultimate outcome, their impact on WWE has already been transformative. They've created programming that feels genuinely unpredictable, storylines that generate authentic emotional investment, and conflicts that feel more real than typical wrestling entertainment. The wrestling world is watching to see whether this represents the future of sports entertainment or a dangerous experiment that went too far. But one thing is certain: Roman Reigns and Zilla Fatu have changed WWE in ways that can't be undone, and the consequences of that change are still being felt throughout the entire wrestling industry. What's your take on this explosive situation? Do you think WWE crossed a line by bringing in Zilla Fatu, or is this exactly the kind of authentic intensity that wrestling has been missing? Are you more invested in WWE programming now that the stakes feel real, or are you concerned about the safety implications of this approach? Hit the comments section and let us know where you stand on the most controversial storyline in WWE today. Are you Team Bloodline, or do you think someone needs to stand up and put an end to Roman and Zilla's reign of terror? Smash that like button if this video opened your eyes to just how dangerous this situation has become. Subscribe to WrestlingNewsCC for continued coverage of the most explosive storylines in wrestling, and share this video because every wrestling fan needs to understand what we're witnessing. The Bloodline's nuclear option has been deployed, and the fallout is going to change WWE forever. The question isn't whether this will end in chaos, it's whether WWE can control the chaos they've unleashed.